blade to have good cutting capacity. Besides apex sharpness, we also need it to be thin behind the edge. The Japanese solved this with 10 degrees sharpening, so that's not really a good idea for us with knives with 60 HRC and below, because the edge will roll. But what we can do is sharpen at 10 degrees, then after you remove the burr, raise the angle a bit to 15 degrees and do a couple passes. And this is what the edge looks like. You see that thin brightness on the edge? That's our 15 degree. And even though it's so thin, the edge rolling, it happens on microscopic scale, and this is enough to help avoiding edge rolls. And because it's thin behind the edge compared to standard European sharpening, it has a much better cutting capacity. This knife is one of the first ones in my collection. It has about 56 HRC, and this edge can last a very long time. During my use, 1 to 2 times a week, it lasts over 3 months of use without any touch-up. As with any other chef knife, you're not supposed to cut with impact, cut bones, cut frozen food, and use only the force necessary to cut. If you abuse a thin knife like this, using impact, trying to cut bones, the damage will be even greater than if you did that to a thick edge European style blade. For deboning and cutting frozen food, I recommend a beater knife, so you spare your chef knife. This one is a corneta paring knife, and I did something slightly different. I did just thinning the close to the edge. As you can see, it looks almost the same result, but instead of going up to the edge and creating the burr, I just thin it, and when I reach close to the edge, I stop. And this is, instead of doing a micro bevel, I just left the original bevel there. This technique is slightly harder to do, because if you do reach the edge, it will roll very easily, so you need to be careful. And if you leave it far from the edge, it will not have optimum cutting performance. I was planning to do the same thing here with the Hazen, but I actually reached the edge, so kind of messed up. I'll have to do the standard micro bevel technique, and it's kind of hard to see because the edge gets so thin. And here what I do to test this, I can do that 3-finger test from Murray Carter and check slightly here, and just by touching here, very little pressure, I can check that it slips on the base, slips on the top, and it has a toothy surface, slightly toothy surface around the middle. So I know I reached the apex here, and now I need to do the micro bevel technique. The advantage of the 3-finger technique over the standard checking for burr is that I can see this before the burr was formed. So there was no burr on this knife, yet I know I reached the apex with this. And if I would choose between one and the other, probably the micro bevel one is more easy to execute. It will take a little bit longer to do, because you need to reach the apex and create a burr, and then remove the burr, then do a micro bevel, so it takes longer. But in terms of execution, it's easier and the result will probably be better too. This microbevel technique I used with 10 degrees sharpening, then a 15 degree microbevel, I have used in several knives and they work very well. But there are other more aggressive grinding plans, like you can go V0 straight into a microbevel. So if you have a full flat knife like this one, you just lay it flat on a stone and grind it until you have a burr. Then you add a microbevel on it. And with this more aggressive thinning, you would need probably 18 to 20 degrees microbevel. Another grinding plan you can use is do steps, so you could start with 5 degrees, then 10, then 15. On this knife, it's already pretty thin. I used one of the more aggressive plans for grinding, so I left it almost flat, only a couple millimeters, just enough to lift the spine, and grind it until I reach the apex, and then do almost until I reach the apex. Then I did a 10 degrees edge and then a 15 degree microbevel on it. It gets really aggressive blade, even though it's a cheap one. If you do decide to thin down your blade, it will scratch everything. So this is the result of 2 degrees sharpening. Changing the grinding profile of the blade can take a lot of effort. So on this one, my original idea was to do a full flat V0, but I changed my mind. You see, I spent 10 to 20 minutes and it still has the original scratch pattern on the side. So if you lay it flat on the stone, it takes a very long time to do this job. And if you raise just a couple millimeters from the spine, it speeds up a lot the process. Since it takes so much effort to fix the geometry of the blade, it's very important to choose a blade with a good geometry. Otherwise, it takes a huge effort to fix it. So to have an idea, I have a friend that trying to do a V0 full flat, it takes 5 days of work, several hours a day. So yeah, it's huge work. Just geometry I'm recommending for you guys, it's for slicer knives. So if instead you're sharpening a bone cleaver or anything that will cut with impact actually, so you would need another edge geometry because this one won't hold the edge. If you notice problem with the edge geometry just by looking at the blade and measuring it, it's probably going to benefit a lot from fresh sharpening. Now I'll show you how to spot one just by looking at the knife. These 3 knives are sharpened at 15 degrees. Can you guess which one will cut really bad? Well, if you guess the last one, the paring knife, you guessed it right. Why? Because see how thick the edge is. The brightness on the edge is a lot thicker than on the other ones. That means that if they are sharpened all on the same angle, this one will have a shoulder basically on your edge. So even if it's well sharpened, cutting well
hair, for example, it doesn't cut well food. The edge reflection will help you to see if you have a problem with your edge, but it can be misleading. Here I have a couple drawings. They represent knives sharpened at different angles, and both of them have the exact same width at the base of the edge, but the one that has a more acute edge will have a much wider edge reflection, and it will probably be the one that will cut better because it's a sharper angle. On the other hand, if I compare the edge reflection from knife 2 and 3, they will look the same, but obviously the cutting performance from knife 3 will be a lot worse since it has doubled the width at the base of the edge. In practice, what happens is some knife makers, if they sharpen at the wrong angle and you get 30 degrees something, sometimes even higher than that, the edge reflection will look very thin and it may look great, but the cutting performance will not be very good. So if you are trying to guess the sharpness just by looking at the blade, it's important to evaluate also the sharpening angle, not just the reflection. To better understand what's going on your edge, one thing I like to do is measure how thick it is so you have a more accurate idea. Here I have a few other knives. Let's try to evaluate cutting capacity with what I just told you. This one has a very fine edge reflection. The edge has about 15 degrees sharpening. This one is already looking pretty good. Now let's check the caliper. Zero 1, 0.2 millimeters, a couple millimeters from the edge. Everything matches what I told you a good edge geometry would look like, and it's shaving sharp. So from testing, the knife looks like it has great cutting capacity, and in fact it does. I already used it, and it has one of the best factory edges I have tested. There's very little this knife has to gain from a fresh sharpening, so I intend to leave it as it is. This one, on a first look, looks exactly the same. Very fine edge. But this edge, it's not 15 degrees. It's closer to 30 degrees. Maybe a bit higher even. If I measure the blade on the same spot, we have 0.3. Don't take me bad, it's not going to cut like a scanned knife or a butcher knife. It's still a fine edge, even though it's 30 degrees. But it's not optimized. I have not tested this knife yet, but I don't expect it to cut as well as the other one. This one is sharpened at 15 degrees angle, but the edge reflection is not so fine. So it's not stupid large like corneta, but it's not ideal either. Doing the same measurement, I get 0.3 millimeters. I already tested this one. It cuts decent, but it's not ideal, so probably I will sharpen it before I use it. Factory edge is not a good indicator of knife quality because that's the only thing that we can fix at home. So to have a good knife, there are many other things you have to look for. There's blade geometry, there is ergonomics, you need the blade profile to be adequate to your cutting style, and the steel quality, so hardness, toughness, how fine the grain is. There are many other things that are much more important than factory edge. To fix edge geometry issues. It takes longer than standard sharpening because you're not respecting the factory edge, and the first time you do it will take longer. To do a 10-degree sharpening and a 15-degree microbevel, it usually takes about an hour. I don't think that's a big deal, as long as the other aspects of the blade are fine.
If you can understand Portuguese, there are a couple very good channels that I would like to recommend. I learned just more aggressive grinding ideas from Leônidas Malta and Helio Cabral. The link for their channels is on the description. Probably most of you guys can't understand it, but it's there anyways if you do. There's also a link for my channel in Portuguese, and there's a lot more content than the English one. So, hope you guys enjoyed. If you do, hit the thumbs up. If you want to watch more videos, subscribe, and see ya.